Hello, welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, Quilt National 2021, the best of contemporary quilts. This exhibition is produced and circulated by the Dairy Barn Arts Center in Athens, Ohio. Today, we're thrilled to present artist Shelley, Brenner, Baird. But first, there are just a few housekeeping items to go over. Everyone tuned in today is in listen-only mode, so feel free to utilize the chat function in your control panel to ask questions. We'll monitor your questions throughout the presentation and be sure to leave plenty of time to answer them during the Q&A portion of the hour. Next, live captioning is available for the artist talk, and you can access those by clicking on the closed caption icon and selecting Show Subtitle. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variation of bandwidth for internet stability. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. I promise we'll keep on rolling. And lastly, so everyone can get a little comfortable, go ahead and click on the chat function in your control panel to say hello and let us know where you're tuning in from. All right, thanks all. Now to you, Shelley.
Hi, my name is Shelley Brenner Baird, and I'm an artist from Columbus, Ohio. And first I want to thank Kat and Amy for putting this whole project together and asking me to participate. But I'm going to take you back to 1993, where, as usual, I was spending my entire weekend sitting at a swim meet watching my children, and this time I happened to be in Athens, Ohio. And so one of the other parents and I decided we really needed some non-chlorinated air and decided to go for a walk. And we were curious about a street near our hotel called Dairy Lane. So we headed out that way, and we came upon this building, and there was a lot of activity going on, and we thought, let's go in and see what this is. And it was Quilt National. And for me, this was the first time that I'd seen art like that, and I was pretty intrigued. But it wasn't for another 10 years that I actually explored textile art for myself. But what's interesting to me now is when I look at that catalog, which I bought, I see that so many people from that exact exhibit have become friends, fellow students, and instructors of mine. But now I'm going to take you way further back in time and show you my art journey. So I really like the quote by graphic designer Milton Glaser that drawing is thinking. So I was always the kid who liked to draw. Like my book reports all through school were elaborately illustrated, even with cover sheets, and I'm definitely guilty of defacing my parents' books with my own drawings and words. I was born in Cleveland and lived there through the 7th grade, and then my family moved to Columbus. And I was kind of lucky because my high school had an informal major where most of us artsy types would spend the last 2 hours of every day, and I spent every study hall in the art room. And so if I was sent to my room for some like teenage infraction, I really didn't mind because that's where my art supplies were. But I took some artistic license for this photo because I'm not a teenager. I'm in my 20s and it's not my room, but you get the picture. I was still drawing. But at 17, I was off to Indiana University for my BFA. And so when I got there, they go, "And what do you want to major in?" And of course, I said drawing, and they looked at me and said, "Oh, well, you'll be in printmaking," which I really didn't know what that meant, but I didn't care. I just liked almost every minute of my time in Bloomington. These are just 2 etchings I was able to find back from those days. But I was frustrated because it took more time to bevel the edges of a copper plate or prep a litho stone or cut a woodcut than to actually do the art part. And there was no screen printing in Bloomington in the print lab for some reason. And the only inks in the print lab were black or sepia. And so I really never formally learned anything about color during my whole undergrad years. But I did, during my senior year, have one kind of interesting extracurricular activity that I did. One of my roommates was a journalism major, and she was working on the school paper. And she actually became a journalist in real adult life later. But anyway, she said they needed somebody to do some drawings for the paper. So throughout my senior year, I did these editorial cartoons and things for the paper, which is kind of funny. I don't even remember what this was about, but clearly the students were mad at the Board of Trustees and vice versa. But I digress. I really liked a class I took with a photorealist artist named Larry Kaufman. And he only worked in black and white, and he mostly, I think he only did people, if I remember correctly. And I read an article about him recently, and he was quoted as saying, "I wasn't color blind, but I'm color ignorant." And so I remained color ignorant too, right along with him for the next couple of years. But I really liked it. And I thought, well, I don't have to be a drawer, which is of course not a noun, or a printmaker, or certainly not an editorial cartoonist, but I want to be a photorealist painter. So I thought about that and thought about it, and I decided, well, if I'm going to be a photorealist painter, I want to, figure out what I'm going to paint. I want to, design it or organize it. So I better take some photo classes so I could structure my work. And so I took a photo class, and by the time I was halfway through the class, I thought, and also halfway through finishing this drawing, I thought, oof, why am I going to bother with all this painting? I am just going to study photography. So after graduation, I went back to Columbus, and a few years later, I went to Ohio State University, and I ended up getting a master's in photography and cinema. The department was kind of interesting because it was not in the art department. We were in a separate building. We didn't really have any art classes along with the photo classes, even though I would definitely categorize a lot of the instructors and certainly a lot of the students as artists. But it was called photo and cinema, so I got to take some cinema classes, and there was a strong focus on photography as a reflection of culture and society, which I really liked. And I had to write a master's thesis in some sort of photo history topic, which I did, with orals and the whole bit. And my color studies were lacking again because, of course, we only worked in black and white. And we worked with all kinds of cameras, like from little plastic 35 millimeter, I think the brand was called Diana camera at the time, to 4x5 inch view cameras, and that refers to the size of the film, not the camera. So we spent a lot of time processing our own film and working in the darkroom. But my favorite thing about photography always was just watching the magic of that image appear on the paper. But another thing I got to do in grad school was work on handmade books. And the thing I liked about it is I could combine other media with my photographs. And this particular detail is just from a book I made called Florida Triptych. And actually it came about because I was supposed to write a paper about my major advisor, Jonathan Green. And I think I told him I just couldn't bear to write one more paper. I was over it, and I was just going to do this book instead. So I got some of his contact sheets and some of his photos, and I went to this place called Kinko's that made photocopies, color copies for you. And I put together this book with some of my photos and solvent transfers. And the person responsible for teaching me about handmade books and stuff is Terry Barrett. And Terry is really an interesting guy. He also taught one of my favorite classes in grad school on photo criticism. And I recommend looking at Terry's website, and he's published several books about photo criticism that are really wonderful. But another reason I'm talking about Terry for you textile folks is one day he walked into the photo lab with this big photograph, but it was stitched. And I'm going to read you, I emailed him because I want to fact check this. And he said, "Yes, Shelley, back then I made images by cutting 8x10-inch prints, archival, into pieces and sewing them together to make larger images. I made a set of mandalas, black and white with solid gray zigzag stitches with a Sears portable machine." And he gave me permission to tell you this, but I vividly remember wishing that I had thought of it, which for me is kind of a thing that if I see artwork and I wish I had thought of that idea, I really liked it. But I also was able to experiment with other alternative processes processes at the time. And this was called quick print. And I know that it's obsolete, but when I look at it now, it's such a precursor to what I was able to do much later with screens and dyes on both fabric and paper. So obviously, a lot of my early idol worship was directed toward Robert Rauschenberg, because I liked his use of current events. I liked his use of screen printing and photos and solvent transfers. And if any art historians out there can please tell me why it's called Buffalo 2, email me, because I've been looking and scouring the internet. I have books on Rauschenberg, and I'm just curious, so help me. So by now, I thought academia was my career path. I had been a TA. I had taught at a branch campus for Ohio State University. I taught photography at a prep school. I taught adult ed. I did a couple of bookmaking workshops at some small colleges in town, or not in town, but in Ohio. But life sort of took its another route. My creative life, that is, took another route for a while. Like this tongue-in-cheek wedding album I made for some friends. And on the right, you see the solvent transfers. And on the left, you see some watercolors that I did. And keep those dishes in mind, because that's a foreshadowing of something that shows up in a later project that I did. And the main reason is because I had children. And I knew that I really couldn't raise my children in a dark room with a red safe light with a bunch of trays full of photochemicals. So my darkroom days pretty much ended, but I still kept taking pictures and taking pictures of them. And I kind of directed my creativity toward them, and I would draw them and make things about them or for them. And I had no delusions about being a costume designer, but I must say this one's pretty good. And I made I made several, and I've made a few for or quite a few actually, for the next generation. Anyway, oddly enough, I started getting graphic design work, even though I had 2-year-old twins and a 6-year-old at home. And I decided, okay, I can do this. And I set up my work on the dining room table. I put up a baby gate to keep the kids away from my X-Acto knives. And this was pre-Photoshop and Illustrator. So, and plus I didn't have a copy machine at home. So I would get my source material together and go to an office where friends had access to a photocopier, and then I'd go home and paste this stuff up. And this was for some big peace event. It looks like 1986, and I also see it was done with the support of the Ohio Arts Council. And I think it was a whole week of events. And what we did on the right is I made these posters, and they were available to people that went to these things, and they could draw and, you know, make their own pieces. But then I started getting big jobs from schools and nonprofits and businesses. I really am not quite sure how that happened, but I did. But one thing I did know was that I knew nothing. So I went to CCAD, which is Columbus College of Art and Design, and I took some graphic design and some illustration classes. And while I was at it, I took some color theory classes finally. So then I started thinking I should have told them at IU that I wanted to be a graphic design major. So I kind of taught myself. I taught myself by getting design books and publications. I joined some organizations. I went to some big illustrator and graphic conferences, like some national things. And that was how I was able to learn processes and trends and about artists. And here's one of my favorite artists. I used to follow him back then. If I'd see anything that he had drawn or illustrated, I would tear it up and put it in a folder and, you know, revisit. And I would buy all his children's books and get them for my kids. And I've subsequently got them for my grandchildren. And it's really cool that I can follow him now on Instagram. So that's Henrik Drescher. Then a retail developer had me do a campaign for a shopping center. And this was a brochure to attract tenants. And I even got to do newspaper ads, which were fun, and an event publicity. And I even got to do a billboard, which was my favorite thing to do. But this is not Photoshop. This is the dark ages where you just made photocopies and pieced these things together. And here is another version or another project from that same project. So I like being given an assignment to solve, and I did approach my work just like collages. And here is part of a large job that I did for Columbus Landmarks Foundation. And it was pretty massive, and I decided to ask an old friend, Jim Friedman, to work on it with me. And Jim and I have been friends, still are friends, since we were about 14. And I knew that he would be the perfect person to work on it with me. He had a vast knowledge about photography because he had been a professor and was really knowledgeable about art in general, just very astute and one of the smartest people that I know. And I could go on about Jim for 45 minutes in itself, so I won't. I'm just going to show you one of his pieces. This is from a series that he actually shot from television. I think it's 35 millimeter, and it's called Duplicity, Dominance, and Desire. I will spare you a dramatic reading, but it's really worth looking at his website and looking at all. He has so many different series, and they're just very varied and interesting. And I can't do his artist statement justice about this particular series, but that's Jim. And then I had him again work with me on a big project for the state of Ohio, and it was called the Ohio Women's Hall of Fame. And it was a multi-piece project. I even had to design a quilt, which was weird for me because I didn't know anything about quilts. And I actually even had one of my mom's friends make the quilt. And Jim and I made a one-issue newsprint newspaper about women in Ohio, rather, who were first in their field at something. And we did hire a local artist and illustrator, Steve McInturf, to do some of the drawings for us. But this was my favorite part of the project. This was a 4x8 foot billboard, or not billboard, collage, and it looks like a billboard. Anyway, it was made to be photographed and printed full size into a big showcase, which it was. And then there was a piece of Plex in front of the showcase where they were going to screen print future recipients' names on the face of the plexiglass. So I tried to find this thing. I've scoured the internet, and it's probably the bottom of a landfill. But I do have the collage sort of a little the worse for wear in my basement in the studio. And so it looked like I would have a freelance career in graphic design because I thought, okay, you can just work from home and keep your eye on the kids at the same time. And I know that people in the past 2 years realize how unrealistic that is and how hard it is. Now, I did learn how to multitask, and I learned how to work 20 minutes at a time. And I think some of the people in these past few years realized the only way to do it is just to not sleep and to do it when everybody else had no demands on you. One day, I went to turn an illustration into the printer, and just in time, I noticed that my daughter had signed it. So that kind of was the thing that the straw that broke the camel's back or whatever. And I just knew I could not maintain this, and I just stopped my business. Because I just wanted to do work for myself also, like this. And to me, this looked and felt a lot like the graphic work I'd been doing. And so again, I started formally and independently studying a wide range of processes and just revisiting stuff that I'd done in the past. For example, one of my re-entries to the sort of local art world was at a place called Studio 16, run by a local artist, Doug Fordyce. He doesn't have Studio 16 anymore, but it was pretty important to me at the time because they offered figure drawing, so I would go to figure drawing sessions 2 times a week. But on the weekends, he would have really interesting events like poetry events and dance events. And I think one of the first times I ever showed textile work anywhere was at one of Doug's shows. So that was real important to me. But then eventually I did add textiles to my toolbox. And it seems like the entire textile world comes to Central Ohio to both teach and take classes. And I attend an annual event called Quilt Surface Design Symposium, or QSDS, which was started by famed textile artist Nancy Crow and Linda Fowler, and now it's run by Tracy Rieger. And Nancy Crow also by herself, and she offers classes, and she brings in internationally known artists, and I think I see one there, to teach at her facility in Baltimore, Ohio. So I've really been lucky. I've been able to learn from instructors and from fellow students and from people that I, study from afar. And this is a picture of some of the people that I like to think of as part of my textile community. So when I started taking these classes, I swore I had zero interest in surface design on fabric. I didn't want to do it, didn't want to learn how to dye fabric, could have cared less. But in the early 2000s, I was in a collage class there, and my table mate was this really smart and interesting and talented woman from the Netherlands. And so I thought, well, she told me she was teaching the next week, and whatever she would have taught, I would have taken because she was just interesting, and I knew I would enjoy the week. And that happened to be a batik class, and so that kind of started my work in surface design. And her name was Els van Barl. And you can see on the right, she also did handmade books, which I related to. And I bought one of her scarves during the class, and it's hanging on my wall because it definitely is art. Then at another workshop, I discovered my miracle tool. An instructor brought a thermofax machine to the class. Now, the first thermofax came out in 1950, so had these been around when I was in college, I might have stayed in printmaking. You can see these creepy ads from that era. But anyway, this was the printmaking method for me. Now, there's mine, the secretary she's called. They're obsolete, they're pricey now, they're really hard to find, you can't find parts, and it's hard to find someone to work on them for you. So what else I have done recently is I use a process that has a digital interface called MyScreen, MISCREEN. If you were to type it in your computer, it always autocorrects to miscreant, which anyway, it gives you the same kind of a screen as you get with thermofax, but you can do a few more things with it. So it's really simple to go from a photograph or a line drawing or any kind of image to a print in really just a few minutes, in a short period of time. So there's like a photo I took of my sister in grad school, and there's a print made from that photo. And one of the things I like about it is you can use so many different media and so many different substrates. So I use textiles and paper, and in this case, I'm using thickened dye, and I'm just using an old credit card for a squeegee, but I've used gouache, I've used acrylic paint, I've used house paint, regular printer's ink. So it's really versatile. And since the screens, they're small because they're limited, so that is a drawback. You can't make really huge screens. The machine can only accommodate something that's about 8.5 inches wide. But anyway, just the ability to move these screens and work quickly on one single area is, to me, was a game changer. And here you see I took that previous image and I built it up with more thickened dyes. So another thing to talk about when you think about the screen process is, if I were to have used wooden silk screens, first of all, I couldn't have kept them all because you reclaim them, and I wouldn't have room for them. So here are some of my screens in my dye studio. But two of the most important things to me were that it's a non-toxic process because there's no chemical involvement, and it's water wash up. So here's what it can look like at the end of a work session. This is Canadian artist Dorothy Caldwell, and she's standing in front of her piece called How Do We Know When It's Night? So I had started learning surface design processes, but when I saw one of Dorothy's big pieces in person, it pretty much took my breath away, and I kept having to go back and look at it again and again at the exhibit. But it really confirmed my belief that, and my suspicions I had back in Quilt National '93, that textile art could be equal to any other. And here I am with Dorothy at Nancy Crow's barn in some master class talking about things. And I've been really fortunate to be able to take several classes with her and get to know her art and her as a human. And there's just so many people that I could go on and on and on about who've taught me, but that again would be another 45 minutes in itself. So apologies to those that get left out here today. So I discovered what I consider the magic of dye and fabric. And I did stuff that I never could have imagined how to do with paint. And to me, rinsing the dyes from the fabric evokes that same sense of magic that I used to get when I would put that paper in the developer tray. This piece is not rinsed out yet, and actually when I look at it, I kind of like it better. I kind of like it like that. But anyway, here's a detail from a stitch piece of mine called She Dreams in Color. Okay, so etymology really interests me, not entomology, kind of scared of bugs, but the word fabric comes from the Latin fabrica, and of course fabricate comes from that, which means something skillfully produced or created. But my favorite two are something dreamed up or even to tell a lie. So I'm always looking at painting, photography, and textile art, and artists that influence me could take up another 45 minutes. And Joan Snyder's paintings, to me, have a sensibility that speaks in the same language of a lot of textile work that I like, and literally using narrative and other materials in her paintings. And this piece is from 1977, and it's called And Acquainted with Grief. And here she is working on a piece called Resurrection from the 1970s, and it's about violence against women, and it incorporates the newspaper articles that you see on the wall behind her. In fact, they actually are physically incorporated into the piece. Now, I never seen the piece. I really wish I could. I know that it is, I think, 26 feet long, and it's an 8-panel piece, and it was finished in either 77 or 78. So she's in my pantheon. And back to textiles, another magical process is the ability to remove color, or it's called discharge. And to me, it's reminiscent of my photo days when I used to use black and white infrared film, and you would get that same sort of eerie, supernatural feeling when you use that kind of film. And here's a large piece of mine it's about 50 by 70 called Full Thunder Moon, in which the discharge process was really critical for it. These are pictures. I told you that I took pictures of my kids, and so those are some pictures of my kids that I made screens and used in this image, and even those little creatures at the bottom upside down, those are from photographs that I had taken. And I'm going to show you a detail. So you can see the stitching, which to me creates this whole other sort of layer of atmosphere over the piece. And the use of discharge was perfect for a piece about the moon. And you see this larger picture of one of my kids is a positive print, direct print with the screen. And on the left, you see a discharge print of the same thing, which again has some sort of photographic reminiscences to me. So I keep talking about my family appearing in screen form in a lot of my work. Like in grad school, I used to drag my sister around and use her in my photos because I was definitely not a street photographer, and I would never have taken a picture of somebody I didn't know. And then, of course, when I had kids, I took pictures of them and used all that stuff to make screens much later. This is my mother's high school graduation picture. It's not a stitched piece. It's just screened with thickened dyes on a piece of silk. And okay, it is a clear homage to Andy Warhol, who I also really like. I like his screen printing, obviously, and his use of popular culture and of newspaper articles in his work. So this is what I was thinking about, I'm sure, when I did that portrait of my mom. So I like puzzles, and I like serving as my own art director. So here I am, much better than having an art director. So here I am in my studio, also known as my house, which means my kitchen, this back room here, my dining room, my spare bedroom, my entire basement, and my garage, and sometimes the living room, depending on how big the project is. But I'm working on a piece called Textiles in a Tube, or a project for an exhibit called Textiles in a Tube. And the point was your piece had to fit into a 3-inch by 36-inch mailing tube. And so I went back to my grad school bookmaking, because I made a lot of accordion folded books then using my the images from my contact sheets. And we spent a lot of time in photo studies talking about sequencing. So that was really fun for me. And I found out that I could make a book that was 26 feet long that could fit in the tube, and I called the book A Long Story. So here's a detail. I'm going to take a break with my cup with a cow on it in honor of the dairy barn. So here's a detail where you can sort of see my sequencing of my dyed and screened fabrics. And then I'll give you a second to see that. Then here's a better image where you can actually see how it hangs on the wall and how it's constructed. And there you see the tube, and you see more of the book and my installation materials, which was just Velcro in my instructions. Then a few years later, they did it again, and I was glad because I already had another idea. So I took circles that would fit in the tube, and I screen printed some more of my fabric. And it turns out that around 1,400 circles could fit in the tube. So that was the most torturous thing that I ever did to a gallery director. Her name is Fleming Markle in South Carolina. She totally deserves gallery director sainthood because it took her 20 hours with 2 assistants to install this thing. And it came back to me in perfect shape. I'm never going to do it again, but I do have a couple thousand circles in a tube. So circles have appeared many times in my textiles. And this is from a series I did called, one on the left is context, one on the right is pretext. I also did subtext, and I'm kind of working on text, which is not going to have circles. And the piece on the left was in an exhibit called Cloth Constructions that David Hornung, who I see, curated. And I was really lucky to be asked to be in this show with several wonderful textile artists. And David, I'll talk about him right now, he's also a painter, and he's a professor and an instructor, and he's written books on color. And so I fulfilled my color class requirements by taking a couple of his color classes and collage classes and master classes. And he's another person that no matter what he's teaching, it's always going to be interesting, so I'll just sign up and take it. But he had the piece on the left in the exhibit at the International Quilt Museum, and the piece on the right was in the catalog. So he printed a catalog, and if you were to Google cloth constructions, you would find, on YouTube rather, you would find a really interesting talk that he did about the work in this show. And the piece on the right was in the catalog. This piece, you're going to see a before and after. It's called Abandoned by Gravity. It was also included in the show, in the book, and in the show. And here, see, this is my thought process and how I sort of work. And there you see it finished. So to me, in this case, the stitching was really an important unifying factor, and it was critical to the entire artwork. So I'm attracted by lots of different media, and I probably need to stop that. So I put an encaustic studio in my garage, and I kind of have a love-hate relationship with encaustic. It's really cathartic to like dig into that wax and carve stuff up, but it's toxic. That's why you see that red contraption there, which has a fan in it that sucks the air out of the room while you're heating up your medium, which is made of beeswax and damar resin. And also, if you're a little, distractible or reckless like I can be, you could spend 3 weeks working on a piece, and you use a torch in this process. You can kind of melt your piece, or if you have fabric or paper embedded in it, you can kind of burn some of it. But I did do a series of encaustic pieces that that worked out really well. These are called letters. And yep, I am one of those people that goes, well, I better not throw that away because what if I need to use it in an art piece later? And these are 9 by 12-inch panels. There are 52 of them. And one of the nice things I like about it, because it's not very much like me, it was just pure process. And the process actually did my work for me by dipping the letters in the medium. It made it translucent, and it solved my problem, because what I wanted to do was show people, but really not show people, like let them think they're seeing secrets. But since the words merge, you really can't read them. And there's a detail of one of the letter series. Then I had painters work in my house once, and I saw their drop cloths on the floor, and I asked if I could buy them from them. And they looked at me like I was crazy and said, "Lady, you can have them." And so from that came a series of about 12 pieces that's ongoing. I'm not done with it yet because I have more drop cloths to go, called The Importance of Scars. And these pieces are probably like 44 inches long. And one of the cool things about these drop cloths is they're equally interesting on both sides, and a lot of it not having anything to do with me. But here's one of the other ones. Okay, I did not do any COVID art. The only thing I did related to COVID was I made a bunch of masks for people that I stitched, and then I screen printed and dyed a bunch of masks. And this was done this was done way before COVID was a thing. And I even went to my source material for the screen, and I saw that it's an asteroid, but I have trouble looking at this in the same way. I don't know if I want to use the screen anymore, but this was actually my favorite part of the series. So I'll show you a detail. You can also see that the painters did a lot of my work for me. And here's one more tarp piece. And this is just really simple and straightforward. It just looked like it was snowing in front of her, so that worked out really well. This is the image that you saw in my opening slide, and it's called Frames Per Second. It is not a stitched piece. What I did was to take pieces that I might have used in a stitched piece, and I simply adhered them to panels, and using just multiple screens as my vocabulary. And my photo history background is always, I don't know, subliminal in there. And I was thinking about Edward Muybridge when I made these screens. And Muybridge was a pioneer of motion photography in the late 1800s of humans and animals. So if you look at that diver there, and then here's an example of one of Muybridge's studies of obviously a woman jumping off a hurdle or something. So the walls in my studio function as a sketchbook. Like, I pin articles up there, I have works in progress, and just things that catch my mind. And I don't keep a sketchbook at all. And in addition to my walls, I keep this idea ring. And I really envy artists who have a singular way of working. And this talk would have been a lot shorter in that case. But you can see I'm concept driven, and I have like having a lot of tools at my disposal. And I think that my sewing machine actually is giving me dirty looks when I walk by out of sheer neglect. But it's kind of odd not having, when people go, "What kind of art do you make?" when you go, "You're an artist," and then you kind of go, "Well, I don't know, it's hard to explain." And if you were to try and get gallery representation, which I never have, it would be very confusing. They would think I had some multiple personality thing happening. And even if you submit to an exhibit, a juried show, and then you might submit 3 pieces, and they would think that 3 different people did them. That's the way I am, not changing now. But that brings me back to my wall and stuff that I would screen and save. Like, if I see something that gets me, I will make a screen of it. And this "No One Loved Her" has been hanging around my house for a couple of years now, and I may or may not deal with it later, but it got to me. But that brings me to a big series that I really have to talk about because it took 15 years of my life, basically. It's called Best Served Cold, and 2005, I read an article about a woman who killed a guy because he ate a piece of cake that she wanted. And it was hanging on the wall, so I would see it all the time, and I would think about it. I'd feel bad about it. I would be bewildered by it. And finally, in around 2010 or 12, I thought, okay, I'm really going to revisit this whole story. So I decided to spend 7 days in a master class just on that, searching for like the academic information behind it, if there was any. And I would type in things like killing over spinach, killing over ice cream, killing over ketchup. And there were hundreds. And I do know that internet searches could be forever and that mine could be incriminating. And so I just kept working at it. And several years later, I started to plan the structure. I'd already thought about recipes and cookbooks and maps and Venn diagrams and drawing mugshots, but I opted to strip it down to simple black screen prints of parts of the articles. And I literally ordered every single napkin on eBay between 11 and 17 inches. And when the napkins would come in, I started making screens. And one day my daughter came and saw this table and went, "Whoa, I'm glad my boys are too young to read." But I reached 100 and it seemed as if I was done. This was 2018. And I thought, maybe I'll find a venue that'll hang them, and at the opening I'll serve food. And then I instantly knew that was impractical, expensive. I might get somebody food poisoning, and I really hate to cook. So I just put them away for a while. But one day I was at the grocery store standing in front of the freezer compartment, and I saw this. And I knew I had to photograph all the food. So I had a lot of work to do by buying the food, making the food, carrying in the food. And one of the best things for me was going to the thrift store for dishes and bowls for the project. That was great. So I was the person who would wake up on a spring or summer day hoping it was going to be cloudy, dreary, and overcast so I could photograph. And I would take a milk crate, I'd put it on my driveway, put a piece of black felt over it, put the food on it, photograph it with my iPhone and take it inside and clean it up in Photoshop. So if I could have gone in a time machine and talked to that person in grad school and said, well, later on you're going to be photographing food in color with your phone, and then you're not going to use a darkroom, you're just going to clean it up on your computer, I'd have been kind of confused. But that I did, cleaned up on the computer. There's the pizza. Then I got to do another one of my favorite field trips to a place in Columbus called Saraga International Market, because I knew they'd have chicken feet and I knew that they would have other ingredients that I couldn't find at the grocery store. So I had my design figured out. It was going to be these 10 by 10 inch photographs in a stark black background with a colorful circle paired with these stark white napkins with the black ink on them. And I redonated most of the dishes to Goodwill, but I kept some as souvenirs. Like I kept this red one because I liked it. So I like to get credit for all the work, so I'm going to show you this grid of all 100 photographs and napkins. But anyway, Best Served Cold, it originated from a newspaper article that sparked an idea. And the idea and its execution has a much longer history, containing the tools I've acquired, the artists that I admire, and mentors that I've had that influence the way I go about making work. And one of the best things to me about my art journey really has been meeting and working with all these interesting, creative people. So Best Served Cold installation has kept me busy for a few years. Here you see it at the Southern Ohio Museum in Portsmouth, which is a beautiful building, and it's a repurposed building, and it's really incredible. And I got to work with Charlotte Gordon and Mark Chepp, and they fulfilled my fantasy by offering some of the food that I have on the napkins at my opening. And prior to that, it was at Cleveland State University and at Playhouse Square, in another interesting space. And I got to work with Kendall Christian, who printed an amazing catalog for me that I worked on with a graphic designer named Reese Grubel. And its first outing, though, was at the Dairy Barn, and Holly Ittle showed it during Quilt National in the back gallery. So that was pretty exciting to have it there with some textile friends and getting to see the textile work. And finally, in November, it will be in Columbus at the Cultural Arts Center with paintings by Anita Dawson. So I've always been interested in human nature. And I always say that I'm interested in nurture over nature, and my nature's always been political, and my nurture too when I think about it. So this is a drawing I did after the Kent State killings when I was in college. So my favorite artist in my pantheon is, she's the queen of the pantheon, I think, is Kiki Smith. This is something that she did in 2014. I just like a lot about her. She talks about her house being a studio, which I understand. And I like the way she talks about printmaking, and I'm going to read it so I don't misquote her. It's printmaking and the ability to reuse elements of one work in another, and the process of transference and repetition versus uniqueness. So there's Kiki. Then, obviously, Judy Chicago was in the back of my mind when I was working on the Best Served Cold project. And of course, this is her famous dinner party from 1979, a symbolic history of women throughout civilization. Then there's Barbara Kruger. This is a piece that she did for the Women's March on Washington in 1989. And I just loved her use of photographs and typography. And I like this positive, negative image, of course. So during COVID, I did two really huge pieces. This is called Fallen Idols, and it's in solidarity with the Me Too movement. And again, just like I researched for Best Served Cold, I researched hundreds of stories, and then I selected phrases to screen, and then grommet, which I know grommet's not a verb, but to grommet onto a piece of felt. And I stopped at 450. I could have had 4,050, or maybe even 45,000, who knows. But on the left, you see my work process. So it is art, so I did sort them by color so I could make it look the way I wanted to. And you see my grommeting tools and the piece of felt in the back. But in the center, you can really see what the piece looks like. And on the right, you see it in its entirety. It's 96 inches long, and it's hard to show a vertical piece in a horizontal format. I'm starting to think I should just work horizontally. But one of the fun things for me about this piece is when I think back about my first sighting of the dairy barn, this particular piece has been at a show called Ohio +5 at the barn recently. And I was in that show 2 years prior. It's a biennial. It's a really interesting show where they have all kinds of work, not just, there's some textile work, but all kinds of work. And I've been at a dairy barn for Quilt National 2 times. And then, of course, Holly showing part of Best Served Cold this past year. So that's been kind of full circle thing for me. And vinyl yard signs is another one of the alternative materials I use. This started in 2008 when I worked on a political campaign. And I collected signs, and I had some ideas about constructing amendments from them. So I did the 9th Amendment and the 19th Amendment. Here you can see that I photocopied all the signs and made my own type style book because I really cared about that typography. I actually like the piece on the right as a standalone piece. And here you see the First Amendment. It's just to get a sense of scale. It's 77 by 72 inches. And so I did the 9th, the 19th, and the 1st. And this is another piece that was at the dairy barn for the Ohio +5 show. And my most recent sign piece is called VAWA, and it's about the Violence Against Women Act, which was just reauthorized yesterday. And I approached this one totally differently than the other vinyl pieces. I was kind of thinking about Mark Bradford when I was doing it, another person who I admire. And here is a detail so you get a sense of my process. But I decided lately that I just had enough time, enough reality. I got to escape it for a while and go back to some fantasy work or maybe even draw. Reality's been kind of brutal for a while. So I'm going to leave you with a cyanotype image by one of my mentors that I already talked about enough, David Hornung. But before I close, that was pretty quick. Look at that. Before I close, I want to acknowledge the Ohio Arts Council, which was established in 1965, and it's been an incredible source of support for arts organizations and individuals in Ohio. In fact, when I looked back to sort of prepare for this, a lot of my graphic design work, almost all of the nonprofit work was supported by the Ohio Arts Council and by Greater Columbus Arts Council as well. So thank you for listening.
Right. So I think we're officially into the Q&A portion. Of course, we've
Yes,
got
I'm
a comment
sorry.
that says very interesting. If you want to, Shelley, if you want to stop sharing, but
Okay.
folks that want to get in contact, she's super easy to get in contact with.
Okay.
Um,
Stop sharing.
website is
Yeah,
her name,
got it.
as is her Instagram. And let's see here, we will spotlight you. And all right. So something that really strikes me about your work, uh,
Uh-oh.
Shelley, is just this natural curiosity that carries you through your work. And I'm curious, um, what would be a piece of advice for folks that are clearly highly interested in making and being part of arts community? How have you navigated that? Clearly, it's a large part of that is just natural in who you are, but what would be your suggestion to folks that maybe are on the front end of their art career?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I never really had much of a profit motive. I never really worried about any of that kind of stuff, so I just let myself, do all these random things, and I just didn't care. And if I was curious about something, I do like to do research, and I just would just dig into it. And I just blanked everything out. I didn't pay attention too much to what other people were doing, and I didn't pay too much attention to what, criticism, the wrong kind of criticism. I like descriptive criticism. That's really beneficial. You just should follow your path. And mine's been circuitous. I'm not sure it's the best route. My parents said I should have gotten an education certificate or whatever so I could teach. And so of course I rebelled and said, well, I'm not doing that. Um, so I'm not sure if I can tell anybody to follow my path, but follow their path for sure.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So we have a question from Amy who would like to know what the next frontier is or the next media or subject of interest.
Okay, as I said, I have that idea book, and I like have probably more. It's that old run on a lifetime thing. I have a ton of ideas. Not that they're all gonna work out, but one of the craziest things I've been doing is collecting lists from people for about 10 years, and I'm gonna do something with those because I think I would have been a sociologist had I not been an artist. And I think it's interesting to see how people sort of structure their lives and what food they want to buy, where they want to go. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that visually. I've run through several different trial runs, and that's sort of one of the things that's going on with me.
All right. So you heard it, folks. Lists. If you have some good lists,
Send me
Shelley's.
lists. No,
Um, Dorothy said, great talk. What an amazing background. Um, another person from Facebook said, thanks for sharing. Terry Barrett said, excellent work, Shelley.
Terry. Oh,
Um, so what I really also enjoy is that you see the connection in your work. So not only from life, you have that really great kind of symbiotic nature just happening
hmm.
organically. So yes, you're dedicating such a large portion of your time to these kiddos with swimming and the meets. I remember I was a swimmer, thinking of my dad for spending your time. But recognizing that also as a human, you have to divine your interests. And it's so interesting to see how many times the dairy barn has shown up in your history.
No.
So, talk a little bit about the impact that you see the dairy barn having, particularly being that you've been a part of Quilt National in the past. Chat a bit about that.
Well, just seeing the building for the first time and having no clue what it was, and I kind of love dairy cows anyway, so I was instantly attracted. But the idea that they started a show and they were promoting work that was not considered art at the time, and actually being in photo, which was not considered art at the time when I by that many people when I was doing it, it's kind of odd. And the fact that they have these other exhibits, this Ohio Plus 5 is just wonderful to me, and they I don't know, it's just such an unusual and such a wonderful place, and just the environment of the whole thing is fascinating to me.
That's wonderful. So, another piece that I am sure folks who are watching or will watch in the future know about you is that you're incredibly generous about your knowledge and your processes, but that's not particularly unique to you within the textile world.
No, it's totally
Uh,
not.
so tell me, is that something that has always been a piece of you as an artist, like always wanting to share that, or has that been imbued by the culture of the community you've involved yourself in?
No, I think it's both. I always like cooperation rather than competition. I just think it's just much more fun and much more interesting. I don't even think you should. I think the 5 people for the Academy Award should get the award. I think it's ridiculous, but I, the textile community, they'll give away their secret ingredients. I mean, they just are open. You can learn everything. They tell you everything, and it's just been shocking to me. I'm not sure all art areas are quite like that. They are just generous, and a lot of people seem to be interested in the other people's work and supportive of other people's work. So that's been wonderful for me. And I really have. I see these people like a couple of times a year, but when I see them, I feel like they're, some of my best friends. Oh, there's Judy.
Yeah, Judy just said you're an inspiration, Shelley.
How are you? Love you. Yeah,
See,
there's some amazing people.
that's
It's
what I'm talking about. It really is phenomenal to see the amount of community. It's heartening because it is not pervasive
correct.
within other communities. Um, the the community over the competition. You said something very interesting, which I think also is spoken to in your work, which is you can teach a person a process, you can give away the secret ingredient, but the individual, because of their life experience, their hand skills, everything that comes together to make them who they are as an artist, expresses vastly different, even if you are delving into something like waxing on an idea. For example, you're waxing on Andy Warhol. Your piece was very different. Of course, it had an echo of that, but the processes that you took in hand and your life experience and your content um, allows for you to express that differently. And I think that there's just a common understanding within the community of textile artists that pushes that forward,
No, I
which
think
is
that's
pretty
true.
exciting, right?
Yeah, and I think you do also have to look at a lot of other art and a lot of things. Like certainly my circles, I was not reverential or just maybe referential to Damien Hirst. He did those circles and made like millions of dollars selling screen prints of circles. Yeah, I just don't see any reason to not just share, and nobody no 2 people are going to do well. They might be able to do exactly the same thing if they're really good photorealists, but I just enjoy this group. I just enjoy having this interaction and being able to see all this stuff and just taking what works for me.
All right, we have one last question, which is what does it take for an idea to make it out of your idea book and into production as a project?
Oh gosh. Sometimes time, sometimes an epiphany, like definitely seeing the hot pockets at the grocery store. That made me able to finish that process. It's just pure luck and sort of studying and interest. And I must say I'm a little scattered. Like I'll go, oh gosh, what should I work on right now? What do I want to do? I'm not, sometimes I'll just say, let's just watch some noir TV on Netflix and clear your head.
I think that's a great answer and a perfect place for us to stop, which is the beginning and iteration process, right? So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Shelley, Brenner, Baird, for presenting as a part of our programming for the Quilt National 2021, the Best of Contemporary Quilts exhibition. I'd like to give a special thank you to the Dairy Barn for putting on such a great biennial exhibition. to the participating artists, as well as to the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the OAC, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists.